Welcome to the latest series of the podcast, where we bring you the latest insights into the future of digital commerce. In Season 6, we continue to interview some of the most respected professionals in the industry as we broaden the topics to cover what it takes to build a business within e-commerce, navigating through business change, as well as the future of technology within digital commerce. As we continue our journey to have one of the best podcasts within commerce, we ask you to like and share within your network if you enjoy our content. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Wendy Isaacs, Executive Director for Commerce and Experience Delivery at Valtech, as we talk through enterprise business change and successful program delivery. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, James. Nice to see you.
Thanks for joining me. So I believe you've been in this space since the birth of the internet, or at least that's what it says on your LinkedIn page anyway. Now, no doubt you've covered a huge amount in that time. So do you want to give everyone a quick summary on your experience and career to date, and then we'll kick things off?
Yeah, sure. So, oh gosh, I'm winding back the clock a long way now, so giving away my age. But following school and college, I worked in the travel industry for 10 years. So this was back before the travel industry had any form of IT. Very old school, having to pick up the phone to book holidays for people who'd found them in a brochure. Couldn't be more different than how it is today. But towards the end of I think it was like 10 years or so in travel, we started to get IT systems in, and I just found that I had a natural affinity for using them and a real interest. And then I saw a job opportunity for a company called CompuServe, who probably people might remember. They were sort of way back at the birth of the internet, before we had browsers and things that we've got today. You could basically get onto the internet through this CD of software that you had to load onto a machine, and you'd have some strange email address that was a bunch of numbers. Nobody had thought of putting your name and your email address. That was kind of revolutionary. So I got an opportunity to go work at CompuServe, which was like a first proper job in IT, and worked there for a number of years, I think 3 years or something like that. And then some of the people that worked at CompuServe had left that and set up a digital agency in Bristol, and kind of said, Wendy, come and work with us at that digital agency. So that was kind of start really of the career that I have now. Working there for, I think, something around 7 years. So we were doing software development of our own content management system, and delivering projects to a wide variety of people, from law firms to accountancy firms to publications, and all of that kind of thing. So I did a variety of roles. That was super exciting. Then I went and worked client side for a bit at play.com, taken over by Rakuten. Then came to an agency in Bristol in many years ago, about 17 years ago, that eventually got acquired by Valtech in 2018. And I'm still here 6 years later. So I must have done something right, and Valtech must have done something right as well for me to still be here. So during that time, all sorts of projects, all sorts of transformations, lots of war wounds, battle scars, successes, and failures, which all have been a learning opportunity, I guess. So
I look forward to hearing more about them in the conversation today. Hey.
Yeah. And as you probably might tell from my accent, I'm a West Country girl, so I'm sure the Bristolian's coming out there.
We couldn't tell. Right. Thanks for that, Wendy. I guess now's probably a good time to kick things off. So I guess a good place to start will be, let's understand what business change is, and how you understand the business and its potential challenges in front of you.
Sure. So I guess when we're talking about sort of businesses needing to change, there's sort of two ways it can happen. It can kind of happen in a really incremental way, just sort of natural, organic evolution, if you like, or sometimes there can be a trigger or a change of management or a change of direction that kind of results in there needing to be a more revolutionary type change. But I think whether you're doing that organic, natural change, or whether you're doing that big revolutionary change, there's sort of, I guess, 4 key dimensions that you maybe look at in terms of how that might happen. So you've kind of you've got the behavior and mindset. So people don't like change. it's worrying, it's concerning, it's disconcerting. People are worried about their jobs. So making sure that you're taking people on that journey, you're giving them the why behind it, you're alleviating the fears or sometimes addressing them head on. And being honest and going, well, things are going to change, but this is why we're doing it. And with change comes opportunity, etc., etc. Super important. Um, Capabilities and skills. So if you're moving from sort of one operational model to another operational model, you may find that there's people who've got skills that you no longer need, or skills that you need that you don't have in house. So actually identifying what those gaps are be super important to know what you need for the transformation to be a success. The organisational structure, how you're set up versus where you want to be in the future, having that idea of where you might want to be and what you're heading towards and how you might want to get there in small steps. Super important. And quite often we'll see things like, well, maybe IT want to transform, but actually the rest of the business aren't on board, or we see the business are looking for something else, but IT aren't there. So making sure that there is a single company-wide view and vision of kind of that organizational restructure and transformation, and that everybody is pushing in the same direction. Super important.
I'm sure that's something you see a lot, right?
Yeah, huge amount. And we can talk about some of that a bit later, maybe.
Mm.
And then I guess the more kind of transactional stuff, like the processes that you need to follow and the tools and kind of actually what's going to change and how's that going to impact the people on the ground based on, maybe they're used to do something this way, but now they have to do it this way, and how you take people on that journey and make sure that the business are ready for any kind of IT changes that may happen.
Okay. So I like how you break it down into those 4 dimensions. I think they're certainly. So I like the way you break it down to those 4 dimensions. Next question then would be, how do you go around understanding the challenges that said business will present you during that transformation? I believe you might have some kind of tool that you use, which is unique to Valtech.
Yeah, well, I can't honestly say it's unique. So other people may have something similar, but I can certainly talk about kind of what we do. So we've got a basically what we call a digital maturity tool that kind of comes in. It's a series of workshops and interviews with stakeholders looking into the business and kind of basically doing a bit of an audit and kind of going, well, where are you today versus where you want to be in the future, and where are the gaps? So we look at that with across sort of 6 lenses: strategy and transformation. So actually, is there a really clear vision from somewhere in the business as to why you're doing this change, what the timeline for the change looks like, how you want to achieve it, what you're looking to improve revenue or remove technical debt or faster speed to market or whatever it is. Is there a really clear why? And sometimes there isn't, or sometimes when we get people in a room, we discover that actually they're not clear, and there's a bit of disagreement, which is also good, because one of the key things that any transformational program needs is really, really clear vision and direction from leaders. So if those are misaligned, it's going to fail. So we can catch that nice and early. People and culture, talking to those, what are the people, what are the skill sets that you have, how does recruitment happen, how do you attract talent, how do you retain good talent? Something that I know, James, you'd be more than willing to help any organisation with who needs a bit of help in
Of
that
course,
area.
we all need a good recruiter, right?
Yeah, indeed. Organisation and governance. So how are you going to organise your teams around, I guess, all of the customer journeys that you have, both the online and offline customer journeys, because you'll have both, people using the website, people calling into the call centre, etc. What does that look like? What are all the different touch points? What's your value stream proposition, etc. I guess from a process and metrics, and sort of talking specifically about sort of software development teams, is what does good look like for you? We have an opinion that good software teams are using modern DevSecOps type metrics, and that everything sort of shifts left and you move away from these traditional, we go away and we develop something and then we go into a big long 10-week test cycle, and maybe we only deploy once a quarter, and if you miss that boat, you have to wait another 4 months before anything else can go out the door. So, good would typically look like you're measuring what good looks like in the teams. You're looking at things like cycle times and throughput times and velocity. You're measuring teams based on how often they can deploy, the number of incidents that you might have in production, what your recovery time is from any incident in production. So that's quite freeing if you know that you can deploy really often, and if something goes wrong, you can solve it in half an hour. That gives you a huge amount of freedom to make some brave decisions, and that you might not make if getting it wrong means you wait 3 months to fix it. Looking at data maturity, so business intelligence, what data have you got? How do you make sure that you're figuring out where to spend the money based on a hypothesis that you can then prove whether or not that thing has actually had an impact on the business that you expected. And then I guess the obvious sort of technology and architecture, what's set up, what's a transition plan look like? How do you move from system A to system B without really affecting the business? How do you make sure that you don't end up having to kind of do a big re-platform every couple of years because you've chosen something that's flexible for the future and maybe allows you that flexibility to go, I want to swap this system out for this one. So using sort of modern practices like sort of middleware and APIs and things like that to ensure that it's sort of very plug and play and you can swap one thing out for another relatively easily. So we look at those dimensions. We kind of look at industry standard as to where we have an opinion that you kind of should be, where you are today and what your aspiration is. And then when we identify those gaps, we can suggest transformation initiatives that kind of help you close the gap between where you are today and then where you might be in the future.
Nice. So you covered a lot there, and I like the different dimensions that you break it into. Would you say that there are is any of those dimensions reoccurring across businesses where you feel as though it is slightly undervalued compared to others?
Yeah, every business is different, and I think we recognise that. So yes, there's definitely sort of some similarities and some core features that we see. The bit where I spoke about these kind of long release cycles and people do some development and then it goes into a big cycle of end-to-end testing that tends to be quite manual, is quite risk averse. The solution maybe to a problem in the past that one thing went wrong in production is, well, let's put loads and loads of testing in place to make sure that stuff doesn't go wrong in production. And typically there's some poor manager of a QA team that gets beaten up with a big stick by some manager somewhere if something goes wrong in a live environment, rather than uh, maybe looking at the root causes of why some of those things happen, or just accepting that humans are fallible and they make mistakes, and actually maybe the making mistake isn't the biggest thing. Maybe the speed to recover from it, or how do you mitigate the risk, is maybe a better approach than, well, let's just stick 10 weeks of testing in for every deployment cycle to try and stop the thing that's gone wrong going wrong ever again, because something will always go wrong or may go wrong, but it will be something different every time. So you're kind of closing all of these stable doors, and meanwhile the horse is bolting out of another one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. I guess that goes back to what you were saying earlier, with people being braver with their decision making process as well, and doing something different to what had been done before. And I think that's something that I've learned a lot over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, and having these conversations, is that a lot of the move to composable architecture and going through this business change process does require brave decision making, and it requires you to fail in certain aspects, but learn from your failures and adapt and move forward. Because ultimately, if you're not failing, you're not learning for the most part. Have you seen that kind of braver decision making process become more common, or is there still a lot of similar pushback to that from maybe what you were seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago?
So I think we're seeing more of the bravery as people kind of see the benefits that it can bring, or maybe have worked in an organization where they can see that actually having that MVP mindset and some of the modern tech practices that you can kind of bring to mitigate some of that risk is making it easier. Um, So, for example, rather than deploying everything in a massive big bang and you suddenly launched a new system and it's disrupted everything, can you do something clever like use some kind of load balancer or delivery network to kind of go, well, we've got a new feature or a new thing that we're going to do, but we're only going to release it to a small percentage of customers, or we're going to do some A/B testing, so for two different journeys and see which one is better. So yeah, all right. If journey B isn't as successful as journey A, then maybe we've had an impact for one day on only a small percent of customers rather than absolutely everything at once.
Mm.
Being able to kind of do beta launches out to a small group of people, or even before you write a line of software, doing a little bit of user testing and things like that can help de-risk things before you even write a line of code. You're right, it kind of requires a little bit of a mindset shift, and people are sometimes scared of the word failure because they see failure as like a big thing, and it's hit my revenue and someone's going to come and beat me up and ask me why it went wrong. So it does require that whole organization mindset shift. It's no good IT saying, oh, we're going to start being brave and do X, Y, and Z if you've still got that big manager somewhere with a stick that comes down and beats them up if the website's down for 5 minutes or something like that. Which again, hopefully that website being down for 5 minutes is something that you would mitigate by having the sort of the two different deployment mechanisms where you kind of deploy everything to a new server, make sure it's up and running properly before you actually switch the old one off, and you can direct traffic and go, oh, something's not right here, let's move it to this one. So there's lots of, you need to change your appetite for risk and change your mindset and take that leap of faith and employ those sort of clever technology solutions as a whole. And I think rather than having if it goes wrong, who can we blame and who can we go and beat up, moving from that mentality to
Mm.
what can we learn from it and how quickly can we actually recover, and actually going, oh, well done, guys. We went live. We had a little bit of a problem, but we rolled it back within 2 seconds and hardly there was no impact, or we got a hot fix out in 5 minutes. Those are really, really good, powerful things. It's something that we've seen a lot. We've worked with a big DIY retailer who was kind of really good on that MVP approach, had some good data to kind of back up the hypothesis to see whether or not what they hoped would happen when they released this particular thing actually did happen. They were able to kind of measure the results super, super quickly, and then kind of go, right, well, we've released it to 5% of traffic. Now let's up it to 10% and make sure that it's still holding true, because we're looking at the data and we can see the effect that it's having. And then, oh, right, yeah, we're good now. And you're kind of gradually doing that dial up, like super, super effective practices. So all of those things
Nice. I think
thoroughly recommend based on our experience.
okay. Well, look, I mean, you spoke about quite a bit there, but I think one of the key factors there is just the mindset shift from everyone within their business. Then I mean everybody, but I mean particularly from the different units within the business and the leadership team, where they come together collaboratively before making decisions, so everyone knows what's expected of them, and removing the blame culture and having the what can we learn culture and that kind of stuff. But look, I guess that's just part of the challenge of business change whenever you go from A to B, particularly when it's a substantial change. If you're using outdated processes and technology from 20, 30 years ago, which many have been until recently, there's going to be a lot of change. And change brings a lot of challenges. And I think that's going to form quite a big part of this conversation today is some of the challenges that you've seen with business change over the years, and just kind of the impact it has, and maybe how they can be overcome in the future. So probably leads on quite nicely to the next part of the conversation, which is focused on challenges as customers go through that change journey. So yeah, where do we start? Should we talk about maybe what do you see as like reoccurring challenges? What are the biggest ones?
Yeah, good question. So I guess one of the key things we see a lot, particularly in I guess digital transformation and replatforming projects, is kind of old versus new. Typically, you'll see platforms that have been built up over a number of years. Features have been kind of added and things have been bolted on. Nobody really knows what gets used, what doesn't get used. Maybe data isn't really there to back it up. So you'll ask a question like, well, for this particular feature, what revenue or what benefit can be attributed to that? And people can't really tell you, but they're like, but we've got to have it. We see a lot of that. And that's quite hard, because ultimately, if you've got some big monolithic platform that's taken ages to build, and you just move all of that onto a new platform, you just kind of recreate your monolith. So it's a bit like, I always sort of think of it as sort of the moving house analogy. Imagine you've lived in your childhood home for like 20 odd years. You've built up all of this stuff. You've got all of this clutter in place. You've decided that you kind of want to move to a new house, but then you just make the new house exactly like the old one. You decorate it the same way. You take the same furniture, all of the clutter that you've taken out all the years, probably some of which is sat in boxes in the attic that you've never used. You take it with you because you're like, well, I might need it. That mentality is key. So actually and it's hard, right? If you don't have good data that kind of tells you whether or not you need that new thing, letting go of it or not having it, or saying, well, we're going to just start with an entrepreneurial mindset as though the whole business is starting again, is like really, really, yes, obviously there's some risk there. But
I love
it's
that
also
analogy, by
gives
the
a
way.
team gives a team a real challenge if you kind of go, well, take everything that you've got here that isn't documented and we don't really know what it is, and then recreate it all over here. Immediately gives you a big challenge, because sometimes that is because maybe there's some business people or some marketing folk who've got sales targets that are based on the website performing in the way that it did before. And so they say, well, I'm not willing to forego some stuff that I've got here because I don't know what that's going to do to our revenue. So again, this is where it comes back to that whole organizational mindset. Like, somebody needs to be brave enough to kind of go, look, we understand that there may be some impact of moving from here to here, and that if we don't have this feature, we don't really know what's going to happen, because we don't really know how many people use it or what revenue can be attributed to it. But because we've got this new system that's got better data, and we can deploy more quickly and we can roll back quickly, we can try it and then see what happens, and then quickly react to whatever we're seeing on the ground. And it might be that we spend less money, less time building a new system, and then find out that all of this clutter that we had in our attic, we didn't need to move. And we've actually got a really nice, clean system with clean code that we can deploy quickly, and we didn't need half of what we needed. And it's a bit like, how many things are there on your mobile phone, and how many of them do you actually use day to day, versus the features that sit there you kind of don't use, that somebody spent a lot of time developing. So, changing some of that mindset and being brave enough to kind of go, true MVP, and maybe not thinking about features, but instead of thinking about outcomes that you need to achieve, is something that we see successful organizations, in our experience, are kind of changing everything and not necessarily striving for that feature parity.
But yeah, I guess there's obviously the whole like attribute revenue to it is really important, but also I guess you get a bit of resistance to change as well. When if you've been using something for your career within a business, and then suddenly it's like, hang on a minute, you're not using that anymore, you're using this. So I quite like using that. It's really, really easy to use. I'm used to it now. I can do it with my eyes closed. And suddenly you've got to go and learn something new. Could be fairly similar, could be completely different. And you've got that resistance to change that's kind of built into that as well. So yeah, so double-edged sword, I guess.
Yeah, and it's understandable. There's some change that happens or will be happening in the future with kind of AI and things like that, mean that some roles don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that's something that can make people worried or scared. We've seen it with a lot of the strikes that have happened in the train sector, where they're talking about sort of taking people off the trains, guards and things like that, and people are worried about it. And that's understandable, and that's human nature. But very much when one door closes, another one opens. So maybe the role that you do today might change, but actually maybe that gives you an opportunity to do a role that you never thought would even exist in your business before. So.
I love that outlook. That's certainly how I think you need to be looking at it, particularly whilst we're talking about Gen AI as an example. It's going to create opportunities, right? I do feel there's quite a bit of fear in the market with how it's going to impact jobs. but it's going to create opportunities. And I think, yeah, if you can keep an open mind, and if you're able to think outside the box of what you can do with generative AI, it's going to have use cases in so many different industries and so many different roles that actually you should be looking at it thinking, okay, cool, where can I take my career with this now? Not, oh, it's going to take my job.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's a conversation that we can probably talk about for a long, long time. So maybe we'll say,
Hours.
maybe we'll save that one
Save
for
that for another one.
another day. Exactly that. We could probably do a whole series focus on Gen AI in the next couple of years. So yeah, okay. Just whilst we're talking about that kind of old versus new and being able to understand the ROI from specific pieces of technology, just off the top of your head, roughly speaking, how many companies do you speak to that can get that data for specific piece of technology? Yeah.
I would say very few of the larger organizations. So we're seeing a big shift to it. We're seeing a lot of companies kind of coming to us and asking us to help them with data and data strategy, and because they recognize that they've got a problem, or maybe it's uh, information's all over the place. They have some information, but nobody knows how to read it or pull it together, and maybe some stuff sitting in Google Analytics and some stuff sitting in Power BI, or stuff sitting in a financial system somewhere, and there isn't a sort of a comprehensive joined up view. So we do quite a lot of work to maybe provide that sort of centralized view of dashboards and data to help people with, and provide them with the skills and dashboards and training in like how you actually read it and how you basically put together conclusions from what you're looking at. So
Yeah.
probably I would say maybe 30-40% have
Okay.
good data,
Okay.
and then the kind of rest is we've got some stuff in Google Analytics, but nobody really can access it, and nobody really knows what they're looking at, or what conclusions we can draw from it. And obviously the website's only one channel, so ideally you want something that kind of joins up all of the data that you get from everywhere. So you might want to know, how does changing something on the website affect the number of calls that come into a call center? And that's not going to be captured in your Google Analytics type data.
Mm.
So you kind of do need something that aggregates all of that really good information that you're collecting, and kind of builds those funnels, and allows you to kind of go, well, actually, when we changed this happened in finance, and this happened in the call center, and this happened on the website, and this is how it resulted in lead gen conversion, or product sales, or whatever the thing is that has changed as a result.
Okay. I think 30 to 40% is a little bit higher than I was expecting you to say, but I mean, it just goes to show that there's still a huge gap between where that number is and where businesses would want it to be, which is, I mean, 100% is never going to be realistic, right? But you'd want it to be like 85, 90%, that kind of ballpark. So it's obviously a big gap, and a lot that can still be done with data. I think it's
Yeah,
only
and
really
it's like
been,
hugely important, because making database decisions, and being able to use that data kind of back up business cases or funding cases, or help with product prioritization, or understanding where your value is like super important. Other than that, you're kind of just guessing, and then you can't measure whether or not the thing that you've done has been affected or not.
okay.
Effective, rather.
So what other challenges do you see then on a regular basis?
So I think organizational structure. So a lot of traditional organizations are maybe business sit over here and IT sit over here, and they're funded completely separately. IT have a budget and they're funded one way, and the business have got targets, and they're maybe funded another way. So you get this us and them mentality.
Mm.
So with, I guess, common things we've seen are IT are really slow. It takes ages for a release. We ask them to do something. It goes onto a backlog. It disappears into a black hole. We don't know when it's going to get done. Um, Meanwhile, you've got IT saying, "Oh, the business don't really know what they want. They're asking us to do things which we think are pointless. We can't see the value in it. It's a waste of time." Or we build them things and then they never use it. They don't turn it on. Or IT saying, "Look, we really could be better if we were allowed to invest a bit in automated tests and deployments, and had a bit of time for maintenance and improvements of the tech platform." But IT won't ever business won't ever let us do that, because they just want more features and they don't see the value of us investing in the platform. Those types of things, us and
Okay.
them happen.
Does that boil down to a gap in communication at the top?
Yeah, I think a gap, and potentially just like how, like setting those two teams against each other is just fundamentally counterproductive. Ultimately they need to work together for the success of the business. So creating those departmental silos, this is a sort of a personal opinion from me based on kind of what I've seen in our organizations, isn't how I think you can achieve the best results from organizations. And maybe we talk about it in a little bit, but I guess it's the difference between setting up a project team. So if we kind of go, well, the business want to do a project or to deliver some features, so they kind of throw it into IT, and IT maybe do an MVP, right? Because there's a limited budget and there's a limited amount of funding for that thing or that project. So you end up sort of delivering something which is an MVP that fits the budget or the timeline that you've got, and then the project team kind of disappear and move on to the next project. The business maybe got their MVP that might have been short of some things they actually wanted. They kind of think, oh, we didn't quite get this thing, or it would have been good if we could have this thing. But because the project team has kind of disbanded and moved on to the next thing, the business feel a little bit unsatisfied. And the main aim of an MVP is that you kind of do a minimum thing to get something out to market, and then you measure the effect that that's had, and then you iterate it. And we see a lot of organizations who maybe just do the project, whether it's we're going to build a new website, and then the team disband, and maybe there's somebody there just doing keep the lights on support and answering questions, but there isn't an ongoing development. And I guess you wouldn't see that in any other space. Ultimately your website or your products is typically your front end and your experience and touch points with a whole bunch of customers. And again, I'm going to go back to the house analogy because it's always a good one. Like, you don't move into a house and then never do any maintenance or decoration or anything to it, because it would eventually fall apart, and then you looking for your new house, or you have to do a massive big renovation job. You have to have that. I'm going to decorate the bedroom now, or I'm going to build an extension, or I'm going to sort out my leaky guttering or that broken tile on the roof. You have to have some kind of an ongoing presence. And I think where we see teams and businesses really successful, they've kind of moved from that business versus IT, and we just do projects and we just build features, to more of that product team, which is a long-lived team who really understand the business. You give them a problem to solve rather than a build this set of features, and they're in it for the long term. They know the platform. You don't have to spend time onboarding them. They can be creative about, we can solve that problem by reusing this thing over here, because they know it super well. And if the team that build it are the team that have to maintain and run it long term, you see the kind of quality improves. Because if you're going to be the person holding the baby and maybe getting a call at 10 o'clock at night if something goes wrong, you're going to make sure that you've got good automated tests built in. You're going to make sure that you've got good monitoring and alerting built in. You don't cut corners to get something out and live. You make sure that it's good enough quality.
It's coming back to you, right, don't you? So yeah, I guess that's
Yeah.
kind of brought the whole kind of project to product type mentality then over the last sort of, well, we've been seeing it for 3 or 4 years now, maybe a little bit longer, but I think it's really come to prominence in the last sort of 2 or 3.
Yeah, and it's that kind of difference between, I guess, that project mindset is, it's very temporary. We're just going to do some stuff. We'll get these outputs. We'll deliver these features. Versus that product mindset is, it's ongoing. It's a bit more strategic. You're focused more on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Yes, all right. Your team size might scale up and down if you've got bigger bits of work or smaller bits of work, but there's always that core team of knowledge who kind of, they know the domain that they're working in, they know the platform super well, they're maintaining it. They can work really closely with a product owner on, how do we actually solve this problem? What can we reuse, or how can we do it creatively? The product owner can talk about, well, it's probably only worth this much value, so I only want to spend about this much time on it. And the team says, well, you're not going to get all of this in the time, but we could do this and this. And all of that is super useful for bringing those teams together and getting the business and IT to not be so segregated, and just think about together as a team where you're solving problems for the business that result in these outcomes that, because we've now got our data all sorted, we can really easily measure.
Yeah, and becoming outcome driven as well, like you said at the start
Yeah.
too. So nice. Okay, something I felt would be good to talk about as we talk about challenges is having the right person in the right role, as well as hiring, because um, I think it's safe to say a lot of transformational programs do require going to market for either new permanent employees to join the business for specific roles, or even bringing in specialist externals for a short period of time to bring in some expertise in specific areas. How do you feel as though this is generally perceived with some of your customers,
A
or what you see in the
subject
market?
close to your heart, James.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of the biggest problems we see in sort of projects and some of the clients we work with, where people are assigned to do a role in the project just because they happen to be available, but maybe they've got little or no training, or they don't have the skills or the autonomy or the gravitas within the business to make decisions. So, typical examples in the product space, or product owners or product managers who've had absolutely no training in product owning or product managing, don't have some of the skills that you need to be able to have that product mindset. Who maybe don't know how to put together a roadmap, who don't know how to use a prioritization framework, who aren't able to kind of articulate return on investment. If I have this much money to do this, then my hypothesis is that I'm going to increase the revenue or reduce the calls into the call center, or some other benefit. So often we'll see here's Bob, he works in the business, his day job is this, he can be the product owner. And then what you find is, from a team perspective, trying to deliver software is they're not really empowered. So they can't, someone's put them in a role, but they don't have the empowerment that a team
Mm.
truly need a directional product manager to have. So the team will sort of say, ask a question, or they maybe say, well, we can do it this way or this way. And Bob, the product owner who's been, pulled over from the business, will say, oh, all right, leave it with me and I'll go and find out. So they can't make a quick decision. And they'll maybe go out and speak to 5 or 10 different stakeholders in the business, who all give them a different answer as to what they want. And then Bob's like, oh God, don't want to upset
Yeah,
Sally or
yeah,
Mary or whoever. So they'll come back with something which is like massively feature bloated, to say, right, well, actually, we need something that does this, but actually Mary wants it to do this as well. Bob doesn't want what Mary wants. He wants this thing. So you end up with sort of huge feature bloat and delays. And well, if it's this market, we do this thing, and if it's this market, we do something different. And actually, you want somebody who understands the domain really well, understands the business benefit, who is trying to simplify and get maximum bang for their buck, and go, right, okay, I'm going to speak to my business change manager or something, because ideally I just want everybody working in a consistent way and one simple process, build it once. And obviously, that's idealistic. There'll always be regional or regulation differences that might mean you need something slightly different. But the mentality should always be, how do I simplify? How do I reduce complexity? How do I leverage out of the box features of whatever platform or piece of software that I'm buying as much as possible, and not overcomplicate it, which will cause a headache for maintenance and support down the line and cost me a whole bunch of money to build it up front. So
poor,
product ownership, super important.
yeah, poor Bob, eh?
Poor Bob.
Interestingly, you
um,
picked the role of a product owner, though. I mean, we just spoke about the importance of that position, given the mindset shift of companies going from project to product. I think if companies aren't investing in a good product owner, and like product function in general, then they're probably setting themselves up for some challenges in the future, for sure.
Yeah, and it's a real skill. It needs a combination of you need domain experience, you need sort of seniority and gravitas. You need to be a leader. You need to be okay with not everybody being happy. You can't be everybody's friends. Sometimes you're going to have to be a bit directional. Sometimes you're going to have to say no, or no buts. There's no good just trying to keep people happy, but going, I'll put it on the backlog, and then knowing that you're never really going to
Yeah,
build it, because then you'll go back to one of our earlier conversations where oh, we never get what we want from IT. It just goes onto the backlog and disappears into a black hole. Like, if you know you're not going to do it because there's no value, just say no. Say, well, I
Yeah,
can't give you this, but take them on the journey, explain why.
and
But
sometimes
yeah,
those softer skills are the hardest thing. They're much harder to train. I'm a great believer in you either have them or you don't to a certain extent. And I think when you're being thrown into a role where managing expectations, where saying no, where being in front of stakeholders is so pivotal. That's really a role where you want to be ensuring you have the best person that you can have in that role. Now, it may not be the best person on the market because you might not have the budget or the ability to hire them, which is understandable, but make sure you have the best person that you can have within your business doing that role, not just somebody because their
they're
role,
available.
yeah, because they're available or their role is going to be made redundant or what
Yeah,
have you. Do you know what I mean? Let's make sure it aligns to their skill set as well. So, okay, that's
yeah.
interesting. Just whilst we're on the topic, is there any other sort of roles that you see in general where companies maybe just put someone in there to for a short term, maybe like a I mean, I've seen it personally where a company has assigned somebody to face off for the transformation to third parties when that's not really their skill set either, but they're there just to ensure the transformation goes smoothly. And funnily enough, often it doesn't because that's not their skill set. But is there anything that you see?
Yeah, I think I guess if you're doing like a complex business transformation or digital transformation things, it's the scale that changes. So it's having people that have experience of working at scale that's important. So, you could maybe have a business analyst in the business who was super good at kind of business as usual, continuous improvement, writing a few user stories. Working with a team, but actually, where you've got a complex environment and you're looking at business change processes and having to do the sort of joined up coordination, maybe with multiple squads, you maybe don't have some like a coordinating business analyst who can operate at that end-to-end level. And we see that maybe in architecture as well. Somebody who was a super good architect who really knew the content management system, who can't necessarily architect at an enterprise level all of the new systems and how they talk to each other and how the transition from where you are today to where you go in the future might work. That's important. Some great project managers who are sort of scrum mastery, who are really good at running a stand up and putting a team together and removing impediments, etc. But coordinating massive sort of program plans where there's maybe multiple teams working potentially from many different vendors, where there's interdependencies between them, and actually this vendor missing a dependency here will have an impact on this vendor's ability to deliver what they're delivering, and therefore a knock-on effect down the line on all of the cost, all of the go live. Super important. So having people who can coordinate at a higher level across multiple squads and multiple work streams, so program level, I think super key when you're doing something big. You can't necessarily expect that somebody that's operated at this kind of micro level can step up and just fill that big enterprise level gap.
Yeah, okay.
um,
Okay.
yeah, and then obviously, if you've got in-house development team and QA and things like that, and you're moving platforms to different platforms and skills, kind of how do you enable and get them on board, assuming that you kind of have a desire to keep an in-house development team in the future. So we do quite a lot of work where we're able to kind of enable developers and bring them along. So maybe they, as an example, maybe they've used Sitecore or something like that in the past, and you're moving to a different CMS like Optimizely or something like that. So we would kind of bring in people who have experience working with Optimizely, who've got a number of projects under their belt, they've been on training. We would kind of bring those developers who are used to Sitecore on board, maybe suggest that they go on some of the Optimizely training first, but there's the training course and then the actual real use of the platforms are sometimes like two different things. So us working in kind of like a blended team environment where we would kind of lead, and then we're gradually bringing these people on board, and then towards the end of the project, when they've got skills, we can reduce the team on our side, and we've left the customer with an in-house team of developers who really know how to run the platform. Is something we do quite a lot of.
Nice. And that's a really good example of using an external, i.e. Valtech in this case, to bring in some expertise in the short term, upskill the existing team, and then move on. to something new and leave the team there with a whole new set of skills, with a different technology that they can then keep within the business. So yeah, I think for me anyway, there seems like there's a lot of value in hiring the right people to do the right jobs. In fact, I think it's critical, because if you don't, you're going to encounter challenges. They could be anything from small frustrations to severe business critical problems based on the role and the responsibilities and exactly what's happening. So interesting, and it's certainly something that I think every company needs to be focusing on as they have these conversations. It's not the cheapest option or the maybe the easiest option to keep someone happy in the company, but it's about what's right for the business as it goes along its journey of change, which is often quite large.
Yeah, and I'd recommend going, what do we need? What skills do they need to have? And kind of starting with that, rather than here's so and so, they're available, or they can do the business analyst role, or they can do the such and such role. It's like, be really honest with yourself, because those are the people that kind of make a key difference. And equally, you're going to need business change people as well, because if you're changing a whole bunch of systems and processes, somebody needs to be in that business change seat who's understanding the downstream effect that all of those changes have, whether that's in your call center or in your content editing team or in the warehouse or something like that. Somebody who is really all over the IT change that's kind of happening here will have knock-on effect on the business. And how do we actually ensure that end users and process are all aligned, so that we all cross the line with this transformation at the same time, and not just ending up with something that doesn't get adopted or brings you all kinds of business problems because you've not thought about that really crucial business change agent
Yeah.
manager.
So how do you ensure? I mean, it's all well and good talking about some of the challenges that we face. We've touched upon a few. I'm sure there's many more that we could talk about. But there's one thing: understand the challenges that come your way. There's another thing in educating the customer to avoid those challenges up front, or B, educate them as they go through the change journey, both at the start, but then throughout the journey as well. So how do you ensure that you and Valtech are doing this to the best possible standard to make sure the client follows the journey as they need to?
Yeah, so we've got a big sort of enterprise transformation service line offering. So we've got a huge number of people in there who are kind of skilled doing exactly this type of project. So I guess from the business side of things, and knowing like how to set these programs up properly, the kind of things that are important, the roles that are needed, the responsibilities that those people need to have, we will always have a fairly strong opinion on that. Equally, on the kind of tech side, we've got some great people who've kind of understand these challenges. Every combination of client that we work with is different in terms of what they sell, how they're set up, the budget that they've got to spend on it, the systems that they've got in place at the moment. So ultimately it all starts with a conversation, understanding the problem space, what's there at the moment, what the aspiration is, and then kind of us figuring out as Valtech, like who have we got that are the best people to come in and help this organization solve the problems that they've got. We've got a number of service offerings, like we spoke about the digital maturity capability assessment that we can do. But equally, we've got things like helping with vendor selections. We've got various processes that we can go through from that, where we just kind of we work with a lot of really good partners, but we don't necessarily recommend this one for this situation all of the time. We kind of can come in with a fairly agnostic view as to, well, let's understand the ask, let's understand the capability of the team, how much money you want to spend, what aspirations you have in the future, what the business model looks like, and then maybe go through a very independent, tech agnostic selection program for, well, you could look at all of these 6, but maybe we've narrowed it down to 2 or 3, and this one comes out top with a fairly sort of binary sort of scoring system, and usually an opinion as to what they would go with. We can help with role descriptions, or pointing out gaps in staffing, and sometimes on a project we'll kind of be in a project where Bob from the business has been put into a role, and we're going, oh, it's not cutting it. We can see the impact it's having on our team. So then it's just about having really honest, open conversations with the client, that there's a gap here that's not being fulfilled, and either Valtech can help you fill that gap, or you can go speak to somebody like James who will help you find somebody that meets the gap. But equally, we've stepped in and helped with interview processes and things like that to help our clients find the right candidates to fill roles that they have in house. So.
Okay, so I mean, the education piece really starts with that assessment tool that we spoke about at the start of the process, and then
Yeah.
depending on the route they go down, there's a number of different uh, frameworks, methods, processes, whatever that you can do to help the client. Once the client has selected you guys for the transformational program, do you find there's still pushback when you're trying to help educate the client based on um, scenarios that you've seen over the years? You can see that they're going to get themselves into a particular situation, and you're trying to say, look, I've seen this happen twice before recently. If you don't make these changes, then this is very likely to happen in 3, 4, 5 months. How often do they just say, cool, Joe, what, we'll take your word for it, let's do that, versus how often do they say, no, well, we think we know best and we're going to do it this way because that's what we want to do?
Yeah, it's always hard, right? You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And we're not arrogant enough to kind of think that we're right all the time, and that we know the customer's business better than they know themselves. They'll have constraints and fears and things that they need to work within. So there's only so far you can sort of push your opinion or experience, and ultimately, we really respect that the customer's right to choose. I guess the way we would kind of mitigate it from a Valtech point of view is we would make sure that through our status reporting and our risk management processes, that those things have kind of been surfaced and are really clear, and they're going out to wider stakeholders. So, here was a recommendation. This is why we made this recommendation, but ultimately the customer decided X, Y, and Z for this reason. So, there's a little bit of, well, we want to make sure that at least it was surfaced and everybody had
Mm.
an opportunity to feel heard, but we don't have to feel that we're right all the time or that we've won or anything like that. We're kind of long-term partners. Everything that we kind of do, we hope that we're doing it from a good place that isn't just about, can Valtech win more work, but it's we genuinely believe that the thing that we're recommending based on our experience is the right thing for a customer. But if they kind of go, no, we're absolutely not going to do that, then we're like, okay, well, fine, let's try and work with what we have, or let's try and manage that risk a different way or mitigate it this way. So
Yeah, well, I think you summed up well there. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And like you said, you don't always need to be right or wrong. It's just very much a case of like, this is what we're advising. You go, you're the customer, you do what you think is best. But having been doing these for a very, very long time, we think you might run into these problems later down the line. And that's all you can
yeah.
do, right?
And sometimes hands are tied, right? Sometimes they go, we'd really love to do what you're suggesting, but we don't have the budget, or we don't have the authority to hire the product manager that you're talking about. So we have to try and find a way to make it work within whatever constraints we're set. So
Yeah.
have to be
Okay.
pragmatic too.
Exactly. And just on that point, one of the last questions I have for you is the definition of a partnership, and as a third party, you always want to have a true partnership with your clients where there's complete trust and transparency and everything else. It's the same for us with our recruitment partners as well and our clients. But how many customers do you believe at the minute um, enter into an agreement with a third party as a true partner versus how many of them are just kind of go and get the job done and move on?
It's a good question. I think there's a bit of a mix. So I think procurement processes. So if you kind of have really what I call old school procurement processes, they don't tend to set themselves up well for finding a really good long term partner. You'll get a sort of a faceless RFP or something like that comes in, no opportunity to have a conversation. It's a, nope, sorry, we can't talk to you. Here's a RFP brief, and here's a Excel spreadsheet with 300 questions that you kind of need to ask.
Mm.
And yeah, maybe you'll get to speak to us in a presentation space, but there's not room for that dialogue back and forth. I would love, like with a couple of customers that we work with, they still have procurement and it's still a fair, open process, but they include things like a workshop or something like that with a potential partner in that procurement process. And that is so much better, I think, for all parties, because ultimately, if you're going to enter into a partnership as opposed to a sort of supplier customer relationship, it's going to be long lived. You're going to spend a lot of time together, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, probably more than you do with a lot of your family for however long the project lasts. um, Knowing that the chemistry is right, knowing that you feeling like, is this somebody that I can work with, like both ways for Valtech and the
Yeah, yeah.
customer, is super important. Do we have the same values? Are we going to be able to have honest conversations? Are we going to be able to hold each other to account when the going gets tough? Is super, super important. So I think those sort of traditional procurement processes where it's, send out a bunch of stuff that someone has to fill out. Maybe you have a supplier who's got fantastic bid writers who put together beautiful presentations, who roll out the A team to do a presentation to you as the client, but that isn't the team that kind of rock up to play the match on to play the
Oh,
match of football on game day. That
we've all
happens,
heard
I
those
would imagine, a
stories.
lot. So
Yep.
my recommendation would be is like, before you make a decision about who you're going to appoint, like try and get in there and have that conversation and go, are we aligned? Are they talking the right language? Is the chemistry there? Does this feel like someone we can work with? Because it will be a much better experience for everybody if you kind of build that partnership. And obviously,
Yeah.
you can't just say, trust me, I'm now your partner. It comes over time. So these great partnerships, some of the clients that we have, certainly in Valtech UK now, are sort of multi-year, I think 10-year plus relationships for some of them. And our teams are almost so embedded in there, they know the client better than the client knows themselves sometimes. But it's taken a while to kind of
Mm.
build that trust in the team. And I guess from my perspective, the best scenarios and the best teams is where you can kind of walk into a room that you've never walked into before with a project team, and you genuinely can't tell who in the room is from the client side and who in the room is from the Valtech side, or maybe even, sometimes we're working in multi vendor situations. It just feels like a team working together. And you don't, if you have that supplier customer, you're in this space, you're in this space, it's never as good as that long-lived partnership. So for me personally, I'm much happier and more comfortable when we're working in that, you know I've got your best interests at heart. I'm not going to stitch you up on treating your money like my own.
Mm.
And if I'm having a difficult conversation with you or delivering bad news, it's because I care.
Yeah. And I need to do
And
it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the part that got me there was when you said about the faceless RFPs, and I think back to season 4 when we were speaking to the customer side leaders that have gone through change, substantial change, and over half of them spoke about the relationship between them and the third party being absolutely key to successful transformation. And regardless of a company's capabilities, that's to be expected when you're in this space. It's about the people. And how do you get to know the people that you're going to be working with from a faceless RFP? Now, I fully appreciate you can't go to RFP for multiple third parties and invest half a day to a day in running workshops and meeting all of them. But there has to be a better way in which you can understand the people, or you can see who you're going to potentially be working with up front to start making decision making process, because it's clear from all of my conversations that is one of the most important factors when it comes to successful transformation, and you've just said the same thing yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, there we
And
go.
ultimately, you're going to spend a lot of money. You're going to spend a lot of time if you genuinely can't spend, even if it's 5 potential vendors and you'd have to do a 1 hour workshop with them each. If you really can't spend 5 hours upfront to talk to people before making a multi-million pound, multi-year partnership
Mm.
decision, probably the balance is a little bit wrong.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds crazy, right? It's certainly an investment of time, I think, is well worth making. Even 2 hours with each, 10 hours is a long working day, right? It's not a lot in the grand scheme of things, and over the
Yeah,
course of a
spread it out.
multi-year transformation as well, it's very small. So,
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I think yeah, I think it probably draws a nice end to the conversation. Thank you, Wendy.
put the world to rights.
Certainly did. No, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, look, I hope everyone that's listened has enjoyed it as well. Thanks again for joining us. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much.
Thank you.